Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Joanna, the leader of Google Developer Student Club of SAE Athens chapter. And today, as you may know, we will talk about accessibility and how to build accessible web components. The event today will be conducted in English language, so please enable the captions if you need them on YouTube and the Facebook live stream. We are very happy because in this event we have a special guest, our speaker, Harry Theodoulou, who is a web ecosystem consultant at Google. As you can see, the whole core team of our club is gathered here today. Lena, Aris, Manolis, Sophia, and Leonidas. Please say hello to our participants.
Hello.
Hi everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
And Leonidas will make the introduction of this event. Please note that you can send us any questions that may come up during the event from the comment section on YouTube and Facebook. All the questions will be answered by Harry at the end of the event. So let's begin. Leonidas?
Hello, everyone. As you may know, the event is called Building for Everyone, and it's an intro to accessibility. We're going to talk about what accessibility is. And accessibility mainly refers to the design of products, devices, services, or environments that can be used by people with disabilities. However, accessibility can also benefit a broader audience beyond people with disabilities, like elder people or even people with situational limitations. People like that can be, for example, someone using a mobile device in bright sunlight. It is about creating an inclusive environment that allows everyone to participate fully, regardless of their abilities. This can also include physical accessibility, such as ramps and wide doorways for wheelchair users, as well as digital accessibility, such as websites, software that can be used by people with visual or hearing impairments. In general, accessibility aims to remove barriers that prevent people with disabilities from participating fully in society. This can be achieved by designing products, services, and environments that are easy to use and understand for everyone, regardless of their abilities. Accessibility is an important aspect of creating a more inclusive and equitable society, and it benefits not only people with disabilities, but also the wider community. Why is it important for the apps that we develop to be accessible? First of all, it ensures that everyone, including people with disabilities, can use and benefit from our products. It increases the user base, it improves the user experience, it demonstrates social responsibility, and we can also avoid legal issues because in some countries it is legal requirement to make an apps accessible. By ensuring that our apps are accessible, we can avoid legal issues and potential lawsuits. Overall, developing accessible apps is not only the right thing to do, but also has many benefits for our business and our users. Moving on, we can go to Harry.
Thank you, Leonidas. Hi, everyone. So, now I will take you through a few best practices that I have handpicked, and then some of technical examples of building accessible web components. And let's kick it off right on with accessibility best practices. So this is definitely not a complete list. So these following best practices are just 6 of them that I generally find as the basis when trying to build something accessible on the web. So, okay, let's go forward then. The first, most basic foundation of accessible web design I find to be semantic HTML. The web, as I like to think about it, is accessible by design. It's accessible by default, more likely. And we break it often. Of course, there are many reasons why there might be different ways of designing a simple component on the web. But I find this rule as trying to get semantic HTML and using the built-in web APIs to create first an accessible web component is key before moving on to something more advanced. Now, there are many semantic elements, more than I can even remember, and definitely the list is so long. I go back to it every once in a while. I think that's a best practice when trying to make something new each time. So one example where this can go horribly wrong is looking at different ways that we can create a button. The button can be very simple to implement, or you can go another way and try to create something more advanced. In any case, the basic minimum button element built into browsers should provide most of the functionality. And where it goes wrong is at the first two both examples, we can still create something that looks like a button, right? Like if you see on the left, we can definitely do that, but any other way, either with JavaScript or CSS. But what we cannot match, though, is the accessibility by default within the button semantic element. So the first two examples won't be announced correctly by the screen reader if a user is using one. Now we'll move on to the second best practice, which is the theme for this talk anyway. So built in for everyone, but I will take it with everyone. I say this because it's very important to work with people that are using daily assistive technologies, or they might be struggling with some parts of websites, like in their daily use. So this is one of the best ways that you can understand the user experience from that point of view, and understand afterwards how to go and tackle a specific problem, how you can then create a UI that will include that person too, right? And I will extend it a bit more. So not only finding people and doing some kind of user research, but also working, actually hiring those people, having them during the design process, having them throughout, not just the design process, of course, but having them throughout the project timeline, working with you. Now you're gonna see I have a long list that I will share with you afterwards with many tools to do accessibility audits or just check daily with automatic testing. I find automatic testing very useful. So whenever you have anything new, like a new version going live, you can have automated testing, which is invaluable, trying to find if anything goes worse than what it was. But it can definitely not replace manual testing. And well, at least for now. The current state of accessibility tooling and auditing cannot match actual user testing. Manual testing includes trying out if I can access all my website just using the keyboard. If I have the correct landmarks on the page and they appear in the correct order. So we'll see later on some of the ways that we can use and identify those issues, but more on that later. Now, this is keyboard accessibility can be useful not just for people that use accessible technologies. So keyboard accessibility can be useful to more people than you might know, like power users. Web power users that just use the keyboard to navigate around. They definitely have a pointer device at their disposal, but they might just choose to use the keyboard. And that goes, of course, for everyone that is not able to use a pointer device. So keyboard accessibility, I find that to be also, again, a very strong basic feature to have in any website, and think about it while developing something. So lastly, one of the last best practices is, of course, color contrast. And I will just take it a bit further. I mean, we know the basics that we should have contrasting color just so that text can be distinguishable from the background. There are many cases that we might use color to display information, to convey a message. So the most popular is showing an error in a red color. I would take it further and say, not only using color to display information, but we need to show something else too, like an icon or clearly stating within the description that what type of error is this and what goes wrong and where. The reason for this is for users with color blindness, so that they can also, again, be included in your design. Now, lastly, before we go into how to build accessible web components with code examples, this is one of the final best practices that I also think that makes you try to find better ways to create accessible UIs, and is that no area is better than bad area. Aria was created in a way to augment some parts of the standard, how browsers are rendering web pages. It's not to replace. It's just finding the missing parts. If you have to use, then use it. But as a rule of thumb, just remember, if you find yourself that you might have to use Aria to make something accessible, then maybe the whole structure should be revised. And by that I mean thinking in a different way of designing the same component might save you and not use Aria at all, because it can be a very complicated and easy way to get something wrong than it was before. All right. Now I will transition to some of the examples I have put together. Of course, again, like the previous list, it's not an extensive list, so you won't find every element here, although I will share other articles and resources on how to create many other different UI elements as well. So let's kick it off with dark mode. So dark mode has been fairly easy to develop lately, but has also been, of course, The need for dark mode has increased a lot during the last few years. And whether some may think about this like an extra feature or something cool, it's not. It is as well a very nice accessibility feature. So light themes, let's say, that have used mostly white background, they got be tiring to the eyes when there is low ambient light. And so now most of the operating systems include a way to set a user preference to a dark theme, and that then is propagated across the browsers. So we can listen for that preference within the browser. And that is quite easy to listen to with the prefers color scheme media query. Now this media query can be used within JavaScript and also CSS. The example I put here is a bit more dynamic, so to say. So we're listening to any changes to the preference of the user, and then we apply the correct styles. Now, this might be the easiest part, of course, of dark mode, just to listen and apply the logic. But then how do you style everything else? I find that if you are going to have more than one theme within a website, it is best to create some sort of a design system. Now, design system can be very complicated, but as you might see in the example I've put live with dark mode, just using CSS variables so much easier. So as you can see, by standard, we set a specific color to all the CSS variables that we define as text color and background color. Of course, you can extend that to many more. And then as we switch to dark mode, just use again CSS to update those variables. Something more dark. Now this again looks very trivial, but of course in real life, when websites get more complicated, you might want to have way many more variables in here. Moving on to the second one, wanted to talk about responsive navigation. I usually see in the web very complicated and advanced ways of creating responsive navigation. But to the bare minimum, it can be very simple. So this is mostly done by CSS. Lately, we've gained a lot of new web APIs that allow us to do to more simply develop something that was more advanced in the past. So I've created a demo with using only CSS and some very minor JavaScript. And you can check it out in the live website. Now, one last thing I'm going to stress about the responsive navigation is that while it can be very simple to implement with CSS and media queries, as you can see here on the right, there are different ones for mobile and desktop, or more correctly, let's say smaller devices and then larger devices. So the way of hiding and showing either states of the navigation can be again non-trivial. So in this case, I'm using transforms, CSS transforms like translate X to get the navigation out of the view. And then when the navigation is open, just use again transforms along with transitions to bring it back to the view. Now, bear in mind that while transitioning any CSS properties, make sure that you're animating composited properties. And by composited properties, I mean CSS transforms allow a faster and more performant way of creating animations rather than animating, for example, the top or left properties. That's a different discussion. But yeah, you can check out and test it with using any dev tools within the within your browser and check out the responsive navigation. Cool. Now, on top of dark mode that we discussed earlier, there might be other more user preferences within operating systems. And in this case, reduced motion can be enabled within Windows, macOS, Android, iOS. And then you can still listen about these preferences right within CSS as well. Now, some users that may prefer reduced motion, for those users, you might not want to show extra animations. Okay. Yeah, there is the code by somewhere there hidden behind the screenshots, but that is, again, you can check out the full demo within the website. Cool. Now, another very common element that you might find out there, and it's with, you can also see this live within the google.com website. As soon as you search something and you press the tab button once, you see a skip to content button that allows you essentially to skip everything else, including navigation, maybe your account button or login and sign up buttons, and move the keyboard focus right into the main content. Now, the main content in this example of the Google search website would be your search results. Now, that can be very valuable for users that are using only the keyboard. So you're saving them many extra tabs to go through navigations and many other unimportant elements before going to the main content. Now, there are a few rules for the skip to content button to work. And that is, it's only focusable by keyboard and can only be shown when it's focused. It should be the first keyboard focusable element on the page, of course, and it should direct the keyboard focus to a specific part of the website upon clicking on it. Now, again, for every example shown and discussed about here, you can find the equivalent in a live website about which we'll share the link afterwards. All right, now dialogues and modals are very common around the web, right? Now, there might be a few differences between what's a modal and a non-modal dialogue. Essentially, I would say one of the main differences is that a modal dialogue will require user interaction before moving on to anything else on the page. So it might be asking the user to save their preferences before leaving the page. So that is required before you do anything else with the page. And a non-modal dialogue is something that it can be like a pop-up. So displaying more information when hovering on top of a button, let's say, for example. Fortunately, there is a semantic element for dialogue, which I think can be used more than what it currently is. So we see many different implementations out there that are not using the dialogue semantic element. Although I would argue that using the dialogue element creates a much more accessible web. And you see in the points I've outlined here. So it can manage focus just automatically out of the box. So whenever you open a modal dialogue, the rest of the page cannot be focused either by a pointer device or keyboard. It closes with the escape button. Otherwise, you would have to add some custom JavaScript there to create this effect. It has a built-in backdrop that you can style, can create the rest of the page faded. And it's always rendered on the top of the page. So any other layer that you might have below, it will stay below the dialog. Now, this is very tricky to get right if not using dialogues. You would then have to use Z-index, and you have to manage what Z-index each layer has. Now, this is very complicated. It can break at any moment. So always remember, try to find a semantic element to use before developing anything. And it's, again, very simple to create. Well, just a simple dialogue. All we need is opening the dialogue tag and adding content inside. And for closing the dialogue, as we can do with the escape button as well. But if we want to provide a button, all we need to do is create a form with a method equals dialogue and add a button inside. So anything within that form that is either that it's a button can be interacted with will close the dialogue. So this is no JavaScript, nothing used here, nothing customized. Very simple, just a few codes, a few lines of code. Now, if you remember difference between modal dialogues and non-modal dialogues, non-modal dialogues are something like pop-ups, something small that doesn't require the user's attention to go forward with the page. It's just maybe more informational. There is a new web API coming up. It's called popovers. I've linked to it. You can find it online by searching for popovers in OpenUI. But again, this is very experimental, and I would advise, of course, using that in production, although you wouldn't be able to anyway. But I think it's worth mentioning here and keep an eye out for something that will create more accessible websites in the future, or more easier ways to create popovers in the future. So definitely check out the demos, although you might need to turn on some Chrome flags before trying them out. And you've probably heard of a focus trap before. If you're trying out accessibility improvements, that's definitely something that will come up at some point. So a focus trap is a way of capturing keyboard focus within a specific element and not leaving it outside of that specific element. So in the case of a dialogue, if for whatever reason you would like to cycle between all the elements in the dialogue, if you are in the last element in the dialogue and you press tab, you go to the first. And when you are in the first element and you press Shift up, go to the last element of the dialog. So kind of a way of recycling the keyboard focus there. Again, I've shown a simple example here that you can use and just add focus trap everywhere, but just be very mindful that this can be quite the opposite of an accessible experience. Be mindful of where you use that and that it works as expected. Icon buttons are everywhere across the web. So even for some of the things that we've mentioned previously, either dark mode or creating responsive navigations, you'll find them there most definitely. And there's one thing that we usually forget is the 48 by 48 rule for keeping the size of any interactive element. So providing enough width and height of 48 pixels for any element that we can interact with on the page then allows better accessibility, especially on smaller devices when it's hard to click around. You're holding the device with just one hand and trying to navigate. So this is very important to keep in mind, and not just for icon buttons. It can be any type of interactive element should have at least these minimum dimensions. Now, in most cases, you might want to hide the icon from screen readers because it doesn't add any extra value to someone with a screen reader, or maybe someone that cannot see as well. So you might as well hide it from the screen reader using the area hidden equals true. But this is very important. You should always provide a description for it. Now, there are two very easy ways to provide a description for that icon button to pronounce it to the screen reader. And one is just using the title attribute of the button element. Another one that you might use more dynamically to either show it or hide it in specific cases is use a span element within the button. Just add the hidden attribute to it. And of course, don't forget that these icon buttons, along with many other elements that you might create, won't show that they are focused, won't have an outline around them to show that they are actually focused right now. So the user might be losing their keyboard navigation focus as going around the page. And by adding the CSS focus visible rule, then you can apply some more styles to show to whatever element is currently focused has an outline around it. Our disclosure widget, in its simplest form, can be something very simple over here on the right. Although disclosure widget, you might find it in many other cases where you have maybe menus within the navigation. So you have specific sections that you can open and close. Or you have expandable table rows or accordions. An accordion could look like something here on the right. Now, this is, again, very easy to create with semantic HTML. And it goes to show another example yet that the browsers offer us way too many APIs to create what we want, what there is mostly out there on the web, and we don't need to go out of our normal way to create something more advanced. Now we've reached almost the end, and I'm going to show a couple of experimental new web APIs that are coming up that I think are worth mentioning. Now, previously, to create a drop-down element, you had to do what I just previously mentioned, doing all sorts of crazy stuff and doing advanced JavaScript. Fortunately, that won't be necessary, and hopefully soon we'll have a select menu HTML element. There will be a semantic way of creating dropdowns. So that would include something that you might have multi-select input or just a combo box where you're searching it and you choose from the options there. Now, this is kind of similar to the select element that we currently have, but it's not too confused with. This is more fully customizable and extensible. Again, this is experimental. It is still in development, so nothing is finished yet. But again, you can try it by turning on a flag within the Canary version of Chrome or Edge. Now, another very interesting and exciting web API that we'd like to see very soon is the search semantic element. So the search element would provide us a standard way of creating, of adding search functionality to any website. Currently, it's all very mixed up, and there isn't a specific way of creating it semantically and making sure that it's accessible by default. Now, this is again very early in the process of development. There aren't any implementations of any browser at the moment, so there aren't any demos that you can try out. But I definitely recommend keeping an eye on it. So whenever that's available, that's definitely going to help a lot in creating accessible search inputs. Now, since we're in the searching part of a website, I also wanted to mention something that is very uncommon, I would say, around searching. So we don't see very often voice search. Although voice search can apply to many people, not just people that cannot use an input device or a pointer or a keyboard. And voice search was actually one of the innovations that were out there that now can be used for accessible design. So whenever you have the availability to create a search component, just try to give a try to the web speech API that is built in within browsers and can actually recognize speech right from the browser. Although the support is not very great, there are definitely a number of APIs out there that can do speech-to-text transformation. Now we have reached the end. And just for the best practices part, I would like to give another summary to see what we've gone through together today. So remembering that there are so many semantic elements that are supported by browsers, by modern browsers these days. And it's always worth keeping an eye on any semantic element that you can use before creating something. Think also as a golden rule that a div element should be used as a last resort when there is nothing else there that you can use. Also remember, build for everyone, but with everyone. So try to work with people that are using assistive technologies, people that are struggling day to day with any other conventional devices like a keyboard or a pointer. and try to also to include those people within the design process and all the project lifecycle. Automated testing is good, but cannot really replace manual testing. And as we said, manual testing is goes to say for the following point as well, that we should always keep an eye out that the whole website can be accessed just with the keyboard alone. Now, keeping enough color contrast ratio that we can easily distinguish background versus foreground colors is good to have at least 4.5 ratio, but it's also very important to keep in mind not to use only color to convey information by adding more icons and clear descriptions. And lastly, but not least, having no area is better than bad area. It can get very difficult quite quickly when trying to use at least one attribute of area. Thank you all so much for listening. And now I will give it back to Joanna, and we'll see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Harry. It was a great presentation. You have showed us a lot of components that we can see daily to many websites. Now we are waiting for the questions to come up at the comment section on YouTube and Facebook, so we can see what people need to ask about the demos that they saw and what you said. So we will give a couple of minutes to send their questions. Till then, let's say that we are a Google Developer Student Club, so most of us, we are new designers and developers. What would you suggest to us about accessibility?
Sorry, can you repeat again?
Yes, of course. We are here in Google Developer Student Club. We are new designers and developers. So, what would you suggest to us to how to manage the accessibility in the apps and the websites that we are going to design and implement?
Yes, thank you, Anna, for the question. So I would say having the foundation is so very important, right? I mean, even the foundation of accessibility can be huge. So there are so many things to keep an eye out and so many things to think about before even doing something. So I believe having a strong foundation will keep a very good balance when moving forward, when you're trying to find your different options, when you're trying to design something or develop something. And going back to the to some resources to read again things that you probably seen in the past. That's definitely, I mean, a part that I need to do as well. But having a strong foundation, I think, from the beginning would definitely save you a lot of time in the future. And hassles.
Great, thank you. So we have a question. Is from Aris. Aris says there is a lot of talk around neuromorphic design. Have you heard of it? And if yes, do you think it's a good practice to use it for creating apps?
Well, I haven't heard of neuromorphic design before. Is that in any way comparable with flat design? I mean, is that a way of just visual designs, I would guess. Even if that's the case, if this is a way of designing just visually, I mean, not as in user experience, but you take into consideration where do I place each item and in what order, and how does the user move from one place to another. So if it's just from the design aspect, I think what there is out there in any design system is to make sure that there is a way to create from the basis of that design system to create accessible UIs. So color contrast should be baked into the design system, right? So always having surfaces and background and foreground colors contrasting each other. This can be automated, and I think that might be one place that you can use enough tooling to make sure you get it right. So you don't need to actually manually test afterwards the color contrast. So I think whatever the design, this is usually one of the things you should keep an eye out for the color contrast. But then again, I'm not familiar at all actually with the neuromorphic design, so I'm not sure what else is there.
So neuromorphic design is a minimalist way to make UI elements that they use soft pastel colors, and all the elements have the same color with the background, and the only thing that distinguishes them from the background is the highlights and shadows around them. So that's what Google said, because I didn't know either the name of that. So that's why Aris is asking if it's a good practice. But I think with the color and the contrast ratio, you covered some part of the answer.
Okay, is that what's used in Material 3, maybe? I'm not a design expert, not at all, not even close. But if that's what I understood it is, like in Material 3, you have, in some cases, you only have shadows to distinguish buttons from the background. I think, I mean, that requires very careful implementation, right? So by thinking about Material 3, Material U, as it's called, that is accessible. Actually, that gives ways to developers across different platforms for mobile apps and web to create more accessible UIs, just because the foreground and background colors are calculated in a way to be contrasted. So they're using that advanced cases. I haven't been in very much detail about specifically on that and in any type of design. But I think whatever design system you try to incorporate, you should take into consideration very deeply how you make sure every element has enough color contrasting ratio and that shadows are enough to distinguish background from foreground.
All right. Thank you. I think Ari's question is covered. We have another question here. So from Leonidas Konstantinou, who says, can you give us some examples of manual testing that are the most important to you?
Yeah, thank you, Leonida, for your question. So one thing definitely that I always use and I always find, even as the smallest error on most websites, is keyboard navigation, of course. So I argue that there are very few websites out there that are fully keyboard accessible. Now, this again is a case where it's also very difficult. And it's also, I mean, it's very difficult to create in the first place. so that you can navigate all the website just with the keyboard. But again, it's very difficult to keep up the standard, right? Like whenever you change one part of the website, might completely destroy the keyboard navigation. So I think that's one of the most important things for me to when doing manual testing, and because it covers more issues with the website as you go along. So focusable elements not having an indication that they are focused, or hidden elements that I'm focusing with the keyboard, but I cannot see them. So those elements will be announced to the screen reader. So generally, it uncovers many errors around the website, not just trying to navigate around with the keyboard. See, we have a couple of more questions.
Yes, of course. If the question of Leonidas is answered, he can write us an okay, so to be sure, or add more to answer later. Now we have a question from Panos, and he says, do you think voice command system or even eye tracking method could be a way of navigating around the website? How does that affect the website's accessibility? How far do you think we are of it?
That's a very good question. Actually, brings up a point I will stress about a lot in a bit. But just to answer that question, so I mean, of course, there are users that are using those types of assistive technologies, right? Now, there are a few major issues, and especially with advanced assistive technologies such as this, is that it's very hard to find them. I mean, being hard to find and get access to just for testing, then we'll have a huge barrier there. So I think many areas around accessibility can be improved that don't only have to do with code and developing. And that is one example. So not having easy access to eye tracking or a voice command device that we can use and navigate around the website doesn't even then allow to test it. A developer could use it, or a designer. Now, on how that may affect the website's accessibility, again, goes to say that if those assistive technologies would be more accessible to the public, I think we'll have bigger success making sure that websites are accessible. And personally, I haven't tried the eye tracking method on a website. I've tried it on a game. That was actually part of the office at Google to show us how people with disabilities are playing even games. And from that point of view, I don't think it would be much different than from using a pointer. But again, I haven't used it with a website, so I don't really know how that's affecting.
Thank you again. I think that it's not very good, the thing that we don't have easy access to this technology. And I think that this should be the first step, so people can take into consideration accessibility when they are building a new web app or a website. So let's move on. We have another question from Salgari. Could you give some tips on how to create accessible websites for people with cognitive disabilities?
Very nice question. Thank you. So I find this also very, very useful to make sure that websites are accessible even with people with cognitive disabilities. That can also help pretty much everyone. So if a website is simple, for example, it has short and concise messages, that's helping everyone, of course. But let's take for a few more tips here. So try and test around the website with someone that haven't seen it before. Just give them maybe a huge task. Tell them, I don't know, do this in under 30 seconds or do this in 1 minute, and just see where they might get stuck, or they might complain about some specific parts of the website. Even the smallest thing there, even the smallest nudge that doesn't seem right, then you have something to work on, right? Try to see from the user perspective, someone that hasn't seen the UI before, someone that for the first time they're trying out to navigate and get to the information that they have to get, and see even will be the reaction, even for the smallest parts. And now, generally, again, for people with cognitive disabilities, it is much more easier for them to provide something simple, short, concise, to the point, no unnecessary animations or images that might distract focus. That can also be a few ways to think about it. And personally, I love simple websites. So just doing what I need to do, find the information that I want, and then leave. So I think this helps everyone. It's a very good question. Thank you.
Great. So for the record, can you just explain a bit what cognitive disabilities is, so just to make sure that people understand what we are referring to?
Yes. I'm sorry. So people with cognitive disabilities might be people that have dyslexia or ADHD or any other type of form that they might require more time than other people to read through some text, or maybe to keep focus for a certain amount of time. So what usually affects those people, it can be even strobing animations or lights that can capture your focus somewhere that it shouldn't. Giving them, for example, you might have seen this before, when you try to buy a ticket in an online ticketing system and they say, okay, you have 30 more seconds to buy this or you lose it. So that can be very tiring and anxiety-inducing user experience to have. So and as a general rule, that would be the better equivalent of that would be something simple, allow the user to take it in their own time, and don't have anything that might distract the focus.
Thank you very much. So I see that there are no other questions for us. Great. So I would like to thank you very much for the presentation today. It was really great, and I personally believe that more people should take into consideration the accessibility part, because everyone focuses on the good visual design or to make some extreme functionalities, but none of them considers to make this accessible to people with disabilities or situational disabilities, like Leonida said on the intro. And that should change. So thank you, Harry. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Harry.
And the team can join us now, so they are joining. So for the people that are watching us right now, we will share you Harry's presentation in the next couple of days. you can join us on our Discord server. There we talk, we chat regularly and discuss about the next events, or if you have any question that hasn't been answered, you can send the question there and discuss about it. Our next event will be at the end of the April, and it will be AI related, the hot topic of these days. I don't know, have we have covered everything? Lena, can you think anything that we haven't covered?
We are good.
Very good. So join our Discord server. The presentation will be there. Also, because it is recorded, people that have missed it, although they shouldn't, because it was great. They can see it on YouTube at the SAE Athens channel and on our Facebook page. So that's all for today. Thank you very much. And if you want another... Thank you, Harry. So if you want another accessibility related event, you can also tell us, and you can send us at the Discord server that we mentioned before. So thanks again. Thanks, Harry. It was great. And have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Harry. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you, Harry.